Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Can everybody hear me? Good. Good evening. My name is Stuart Love. I am Westminster City Council's Chief Executive, and I am in effect chairing tonight's meeting, so helping to field your questions and ask the Cabinet to respond to those. So very brief housekeeping from me. No fire alarm planned for tonight. If there is a fire alarm that goes off, the two exits are at the front here and then one at the back where we came in. So just go to the exit that's closest to you. The bathrooms are also at the back of the hall. Once the Cabinet has introduced themselves, we're going to hear from the leader, who will just give us some reflections on the year that's gone by, as well as some thoughts about what the future might hold. Can I just ask, when we do come to questions, that you please state your name and then keep the question as concise as possible. There are a lot of people here tonight, which is great, but we would also like to get through as many questions as possible. So with that, I'm going to ask the Cabinet to briefly introduce themselves, starting with Councillor Noble.
Hi. My name is Matt Noble. I'm the Cabinet Member for Climate Action, Regeneration and Renters.
Hi, I'm Jeff Barraclough, look after planning and economic development.
I'm Nafsika Butler-Thalassis. I'm Cabinet Member for Adult Social Care, Public Health and the Voluntary Sector.
Hi, my name's Lisa Begum and I'm Cabinet Member for Housing Services.
There, I'm David Boothroyd. I'm Cabinet Member for Finance and Council Reform.
Hi, I'm Tim Rocker. I'm one of the Deputy Leaders and I'm responsible for Children's Services, Leisure and Culture.
Hi, I'm Aisha Les and I'm the other Deputy Leader and also Cabinet Member for Public Protection and Communities.
And finally, I'm Councillor Paul de Moldenberg. I'm Cabinet Member for City Management and Air Quality.
And finally, I'm Councillor Adam Hugg and I am Leader of the Council. So, good evening everyone, and thank you for taking the time to come here tonight. It's been something of a whirlwind over the last year for me becoming Leader of the Council, and I know that's the same for my Cabinet colleagues here tonight. But I'm both proud of what we've managed to achieve in the short space of time since last May, but I'm also clear about the scale of the task that still lies ahead of us. And I want to touch briefly on some of those achievements, and I want to set out for you some of our longer-term goals for the city over the coming years. Fundamentally, we have an ambition to transform Westminster into a council that combines efficient and effective services with a commitment to social justice. These are not mutually exclusive. In fact, we believe Westminster will only truly be able to provide the best services for all residents by making a commitment to tackling the biggest injustices and supporting those most in need. We know our city combines the glitz and glamour of the West End with some of the highest rates of poverty in the country, which is why it's been hugely important to us to make sure that our residents have been supported as best we can through the cost of living crisis. Over the last year, we've put together a £14 million package of support to fund food banks, energy vouchers, additional holiday activities for young people, and additional direct payments. Beyond this, we have also ensured that all of our primary school children now receive free school meals, and that we will be rolling it out to our nurseries and secondary schools from September to help children from 3 to 14 receive a free school meal. This saves families £550 per child per year. We've also created a £1 million rent support fund for tenants who don't receive government benefits, and we've frozen the Westminster rate of council tax this year. 2 weeks ago, I had the honour of officially opening the permanent home for Mary Smith's Pantry, just one of the many food pantries and food banks around our city where local people are helping support others in their communities through these difficult times. And there are a few more important milestones to mention, such as the reopening of the Bayswater Children's Centre, our new online consultation hub, signing the Unison Ethical Care Charter, and investing over £500,000 in mental health provision and services for residents with learning disabilities. Looking to the year ahead, the provision of truly affordable housing remains a priority. We're building 1,000 new council homes for social rent over these next 4 years, 300 more than in the plans we inherited from the previous administration, as well as hundreds of new intermediate homes for rent, that we're making both more affordable and better targeted at key workers. And we're doing this despite the inflationary pressures that are impacting house building elsewhere, not only because we found more investment from Westminster's own funds, but because we've held long overdue residence ballots on Church Street and Ebury, which have helped unlock over £60 million in additional funding from the Mayor of London. We're also doing more to invest in our stock of temporary accommodation and in our own existing housing stock. We're committed to buying at least another 270 temporary accommodation homes in or near the borough over the next 3 years. And with energy bills also soaring, we've taken action to protect tenants by installing energy-efficient improvements into more than 500 existing social homes, and we'll be doing more in the years to come. So, as has been set out in the Year of Delivery report on the Council's website, we've done a lot, but there's still a lot more to do. Because we know the cost of living crisis is going to be with us for some time to come, and we know we're doing more to help in the months ahead. We're working hard to address long-standing challenges in the Council's housing service, which means it's not yet where it needs to be to meet the needs of local people. And we know a busy, changing city can bring real challenges as well as opportunities that we know about, from ASB to planning and licensing issues, that our teams work hard to address, but we know we don't always get there. And I'd like to end by reiterating that underpinning everything we're trying to do is our commitment to building a fairer Westminster. That's our commitment to fairer economy, communities, housing, environment, and making a more accessible council. And as part of that more accessible council, we're opening up our council meetings. So from the next council meeting on the 27th of June onwards, you'll be able to ask questions of the Cabinet on the night. You can submit these up to 3 weeks in advance, so the first opportunity to submit these questions will be on the 7th of June. And in doing this, we're working to give residents a stronger voice at the heart of the council. So, our plan for a fairer Westminster is ambitious. This is what we said we're going to do over the next year. But it's driven by a feeling that things have been unfair for too many for too long. And we're doing our best to change that. So we've done a lot in our first year, but there's a lot more to do. And I look forward to hearing your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I should also say at the beginning we do have an online audience, so I will try to alternate between questions from those who are here with us tonight and anything we get submitted online. So with that, do we have any questions? The roving microphones anyway. Yeah. However you come to.
My name is Sarah Carlson, and I reside at 15 Charles Street with my husband Morris Carlson. On June 17, 2021, CLPUD approved the change of use of the Grade 2 listed building next to our residence at 16 Charles to a restaurant, as requested by a company which is a French restaurant chain. The approval for the restaurant intends to serve 1,000 seatings per day, which is not consistent with your own city plan or the Mayfair neighborhood plan. This is a residential area. This restaurant is right next door to our dining room and our living room. You did not have the required fire safety review when this change was approved, and it is deemed that no fire safety report is considered necessary now. This building has only one exit to the street, so if there's a fire, all patrons and all staff would have to go out that one door. The public benefit from this restaurant is questionable given the harm to be done to the building and our neighborhood, not to mention recycling, garbage, deliveries, all to the front door because there's no use. How is this consistent with the WCC City Plan and Mayfair Neighborhood Plan? Who will answer for the impacts as we see the garbage and recycle piled up right outside our front living room? We are residences on both sides of this building. And what's the point of considering a judicial review of these guidelines? Because our lawyers, through our association of our building where 22 residents are, have told us it's pretty much useless to go against Westminster. We don't want a restaurant inserted into our neighborhood between two residential buildings, certainly not one that has 1,000 patrons a day. And we don't want to be the next Grenville because apparently there's no fire plant. There's one door for everyone to go out.
So just for clarity, did you say it was passed in planning permission in 2021?
June 17, 2021.
Okay. So, as you know, obviously we've been, as an administration, since last May. So I don't know whether anyone on this panel will have been involved in that initial planning application. And obviously, if it is passed in 2021, it will obviously be passed by the committee at the time. So I'm going to ask, does anyone here know what this case is and whether there's a planning enforcement issue that's in relation to it?
I'm not familiar with this particular case, but understand the difficulty this presents to the neighbouring residents. So if you can wait till the end of the meeting, very happy to have a conversation with you. And I've got one of our senior planning officers here, and we can have a conversation together if that would help.
Certainly, they're really going to consider revoking this change of use of the building. It was never a restaurant, never has been. And we can't understand.
I don't think we would legally be able to, would we? I mean, as I said, this is a planning decision that was taken by a planning committee under a different council two years ago. So I don't know.
I think the best thing is if we deal with the specifics after the meeting, as Councillor Barraclough suggested.
Happy to try and help, but obviously, as I said, it's...
But I mean, to answer the substantive question for everybody else, if a building is in operation as a residential building, then residential is a very highly protected planning use class, and it's very, very unusual to have a residential building converted into any other use. The bar is very, very high because we have a housing crisis in London, and we don't have a restaurant crisis. It's easy to find somewhere to eat. It's not always easy to find somewhere to live. So that wouldn't be our normal policy. But we'll need to have a conversation later on about the specifics of this particular case, which, as Adam mentioned, happened before I was in charge of planning policy. So I can probably shed some light on that. So the government deregulated a number of planning use classes during the pandemic, and one of the things it did was to allow people to turn offices into restaurants. That was allowed by the government, so that wasn't a Westminster Council policy. But clearly, with any restaurant, there is issues of amenity, of smells and of noise and all the other things that you're talking about, which need to be taken into account. But I'm not familiar with this particular case, but we'll have a chat afterwards, and I will learn much more from you guys. So thank you for asking the question.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think the next person I saw was a gentleman right behind. Sorry, just right there. Yeah, and then we'll go to the other side of it.
Hello, my name's Philip Benstead. The question I've got to ask, to be fairer, you may need money. So the question is, the government gives various local authorities different amounts of money, and under the Conservative government, they consider Westminster their flagship. So I want to know, are you having any trouble getting money from the government?
I'll go to David for the specifics. What I would say is, all of local government has had, as you said, had a really tough time over the last 13 years under this government. I mean, obviously, I don't think this is a party political platform, but you've asked me a question about government funding. So all local government has found it very, very hard over that time. I don't think we've yet found any specific new problems that weren't there before, but there are real issues about the amount of funding that has been coming into local government. But David may correct me if I'm wrong on the specifics.
Yes, I could give you a brief talk through this. I could talk for hours about it, but I'll cut it short. The main body of government funding is done according to a formula. So they'll work out what each council needs in terms of how what the problems it's got and the typical spending it would need to meet them. And that formula has been basically the same for quite a long time. The government has been they committed a few years ago to revise the formula, and that revision has been waiting around for many years to be implemented. And it's always been, oh, we'll implement it next year. Oh, we don't have time, we'll implement it next year. And it's still waiting to be implemented. And that would, some of the details that were provided a few years ago about what that would mean would involve Westminster probably suffering and getting less money because it would be directed towards Shire County areas. That's not happened yet, and we're fairly confident it won't happen for at least 2 years, by which time there will be a general election, and who knows what the attitude of the government will be to funding formulas for local government. The other area is on our population, because obviously you're funded according to how many people you are serving. And as was quite widely reported, the 2021 census, which is the basis for the population figures, that was conducted during lockdown, and lots of people who would normally be living in Westminster chose to spend lockdown out of town if they happened to have access to a home that was away from the inner city. So our population figures were quite low, and artificially low, in 2021. Now, the understanding that we have is that the population figures have not yet been revised in alliance with what was found in the census, and that what the Office of National Statistics will give us will be a decent population that more accurately reflects what our population is now, given that it's bounced back after lockdown. So government is playing fair by us so far.
Thank you, Councillor. Question? Yep.
I wanted to speak to you about the intermediate housing provision. I moved into Westminster, One Church Square, which is owned by our landlord, which is the charity Dolphin Square Charitable Foundation, in 2013. When we moved in, we found out that there was a wet house just opposite called Hopkinson's House. And since then, we've had issues with antisocial behaviour, and we've brought these issues to the council numerous times. There are methadone needles in the square in front of our building, noise throughout the day and night. We don't sleep at night. It's affected our children. We see people urinating in front of our windows, screaming obscenities. We have approached the council about it. There's drug dealing. I mean, the list goes on. We've had defecation outside of our homes. It has been disgusting. And we have approached the council, and we have asked for someone to get back to us about what we can do, whether there's CCTV that can be put in or something that can address this issue. It got worse during lockdown. We have had no respite. Nothing has happened since then. We've had no response from anyone. We've had some planning permission to protect the social housing that's opposite, but nothing for us as intermediate housing, intermediate renters. We are completely ignored, and it has come to a head now. That's one issue that we've had. We've also had issues with our landlord. Our landlord has increased our rent to the point where we had to take it to a tribunal and have our rent decreased. And since then, one of the residents who was brave enough to go to the tribunal has been landed with a Section 21 eviction order. I mean, we've had a lot to deal with. We've had no support from the council. At every opportunity, we've had no support.
Thank you. In terms of the antisocial behaviour aspect, Councillor Lester, do you want to?
Yeah, thank you very much for bringing that to my attention. I was unaware of the issues that you raised just now. What I can say is that I'll take it back to our ASB housing team that deal with ASB on the social housing opposite your block, so Hopkinson House, you said? So the ASB is predominantly coming from there? Right, okay, and so they're coming into Dolphin Square to where you live? Sorry? Oh, right, okay, Is it St James's Square?
St James the Less Church. It's a square in front of their building, and it's literally...
Right, okay. I'll have to take that back to the officers and see how far they've got. So presumably you and other neighbours have reported this time and time out again.
10 years.
Right. Okay.
So I think as a council, corporate is aware of the real issues around Hopkinson House, and I know that officers are looking at some of the challenges that specifically relate to that. Obviously, in relation to the properties that, as you say, in the relation to the properties that Westminster directly manages, there's obviously been work to try and do ASB works. I would say obviously those took far too long, and they're getting underway. But I think one thing we can probably do is find a way of trying to talk to your current landlord. You say was it Dolphin Living or Dolphin Square Foundation?
They're the same.
Yeah. Okay. So I think there may be an option we can talk about what ASB can be raised. And Matt Noble who can take that away and raise that with Dolphin Living directly. And I'm sorry to hear about the Section 21. The government has taken far too long to reform, talk about leaseholder reform to get rid of Section 21. But it's absolutely, it can't come a day soon enough. So I'm really sorry that you've had to face that. But yeah, I think the issues around Hopkinson House are known, they're entrenched, they are very difficult to solve, but there are certain actions that are hopefully coming over the coming months to help address that. But I think we'll go away and talk to Dolphin Living about any security works in the capital on your block, and then we'll pick it up with you afterwards.
If you can pass your email address to Nick, if you can pass them on, and I'll touch base with you after. Just to keep you updated. Thank you.
And is there any feedback in relation to the eviction notice that one of our residents?
We can pick that up.
Thank you. I'm just very quickly going to go to one of the online questions, and we'll come back to people in the room. Councillor de Moldenberg, I think this is probably for you. How are you planning to deal with the endemic speeding on our streets? Police can't police it. Signs alone make no difference. Will you design it out of our roads? And that's from Swami Rosha.
Thank you, Swami, who is, I know well, one of our cycling instructors. One of the things that we want to do is reduce reliance on cars. We want to promote more active travel, so that's more people walking, more people on cycles, more people on public transport. And so what we want to do is make sure that our roads are fit for purpose, so that our pavements are fit for purpose for pedestrians, so that we have drop curbs, so we have zebra crossings, so that people can walk safely through our city on a daily basis. We also want to make cycling easier, and so we're working with Transport for London on a series of cycle routes, so that wherever possible we have protected cycle lanes, that we make it easier and safer for people to get about by cycle, particularly younger people who understandably feel intimidated on some of our roads. And we want to, at the same time, encourage people to use their cars less and use public transport more. And so we're working closely with Transport for London on improving bus speeds so that people can get where they want quicker, and bus reliability so that when buses are supposed to come, they arrive, similarly with the underground as well. So we want to develop a integrated public transport and strategy so that we transform the way in which people use our roads. We want to ensure that wherever possible, we make our roads more friendly for people. So we want to introduce more pocket parks. We want to introduce more trees. That will improve the environment and make it more friendly and environmentally sustainable. So we're looking at all this in detail. We've made a start, and over the next few years, we hope to improve things significantly to make Westminster a more interesting place to walk, to cycle, and to just go about your life in a friendly and environmentally sustainable way.
Next question from the room. Mr. Morley at the back, I think, was the next person I saw.
Hi, good evening. Jonathan Morley, Westbourne Road, Ward. We're thrilled to have our local councillors running council now, and it's great to see you guys up there. Personally, I find it very depressing to hear comments from this lady over here about antisocial behaviour, where we know it's out of control across the borough. We have the same experiences in our ward. Often these experiences come from council estates. I live on one. The question I wanted to put to my councillors is, can we have a commitment to opening, well, would you agree that the closure of estate offices have really contributed to this problem? And can we have a commitment to reopening estate offices, reinstating local teams who get to know the people, the perpetrators of antisocial behaviour, and really have a relationship with those people and are able to control it? At the moment, it's utterly out of control. Yeah, it's very depressing. It's depressing to hear across the borough that the same things are going on. And off-pat answers are really not helpful.
If we start with Councillor Begum on that one.
So I'm happy to say that we are reopening our estate offices. So we're starting off with our first estate office, which is going to be open next week in Bruckner Street. We're recruiting more housing officers as well, so that they have smaller patches and they can engage with residents. And, you know, I'm not going to paint a rosy picture. I know there are lots of ASB cases, and I've given our teams a steer to ensure that people are not, you know, not in breach of their tenancy agreements. We are your landlord, and we have a duty of care towards you, and we are trying to move towards a different direction to ensure that we can take more control of those ASB issues.
Well, just to
specific for our Bayswater children's
Yeah. So without wanting to, you know, we're going to be making an announcement, as Lisa said, in early June about some of the next steps. We're not able to reopen everything all at once, but I can give you some positive hope about, because we've discussed that particular issue, and you will note that we've already been able to take back control of the lower half of the Bayswater Children's Centre, and there is.
We didn't know that, and it'd be great. We've just had our meeting room.
So it's current. So the ground floor has currently been reopened as a stay and play children's centre, but the top floors are. Watch this space. Is all I can say. So ultimately, we are there are across the city. We're looking at where there is capacity. We can't turn back the clock until 2016 because, as you know, many of the state offices have actually been turned into housing. But we are looking at across the city where the highest need is and where sort of basically what's the furthest distances from the existing hubs. So we're going to be making some announcements next month about the next steps on that. So.
Okay, well, we see as the Bayswater Children's Centre as a great hub right in the middle of a whole load of estates, which could be the state office.
I mean, you'll note I'm trying not to sit on an announcement here, but we'll take your point.
Thank you very much. Can we come to the front here, please?
Thank you. Faye Sandler, I think some of you know me. Regarding the ASB, it's rampant throughout Westminster. The way ASB is dealt with is seriously incompetently dealt with, in that every complaint is done in silos as an individual complaint. When it's finally dealt with, it's months, sometimes almost a year later, where it becomes a little bit problematic to try and prove what's gone on. We have a lot of elderly people in our area of Fitzrovia, and I think when you're talking, I'm sorry I'm jumping around a little bit, but when you're talking estate officers dealing with ASB, having a housing officer come around, if you're an on-street property, you're not getting the same level of attention as if you were on an estate. The problems are so profound in our area, and on top of that, people who are elderly can't get to the estate office. You're lucky if someone comes every 3 months to walk around at a time when most people are not there in the first instance. It's a serious problem, and Greenwell Street, if we're talking as well from air pollution and everything, you need to come and look at the traffic because it's been diverted through a short road where there's an orthopedic centre. There's 22 commercial properties around the vicinity. We have an elderly residents association along the road where you have double glazed and done everything you should do for them. All the other on-street properties, we haven't even seen our windows cleaned. I've been there 4 years with all the headaches. The properties have not been cleaned. People are dumping. You've made a contra-cycle lane that someone is going to get killed when we have these thundering trucks coming through a residential road, polluting, idling, and then we're getting now the new cycles being strewn across the pavements. It's been used for antisocial behaviour. We're getting pedicabs coming through at night. We're getting electric scooters. And this ASB, you can be sure it's the same crowd. It's organised crime, bringing cohorts of residents into this. And there's been reams of loggings, but the way the team is dealing with it, I think they're overwhelmed. It's very in silos, and I think it's the same with the way you distribute your funding. I think the government is taking advantage. They've been draining Westminster of services. We're fully aware. They made the so-called levelling up £80,000 or something. It's not consistent with all the boroughs. Some of it is done in delayed little payments from what I can see. But when you look at South Yorkshire and best practice, there's one pot. So the housing, the mayor, they collaboratively work together. When it comes to Westminster, all I hear is that schools are closing, stations are closing, buses are trying to be diverted. We've had TfL meetings. If you want people to use central London, that was the flagship, as we say, you can't keep draining the services away from the residents, and you can't keep working in this silos manner. You need to start bringing things back to Westminster, standing your ground, and not letting the local authority bear the brunt by expenditure that really should be funded by the government in a better, proactive way. Sorry, it's a bit long-winded, but I kind of feel strongly.
There was a lot in there. I think, should we start with the antisocial behaviour?
Yeah. Thank you very much. And I'll start with the pedicabs, because I know you ended with that in my portfolio. So we have regular operations around the West End around pedicabs. We've had prosecutions, very successful prosecutions and fines. We continue to do that. Last Saturday was our last pedicab operation, and we do them sporadically over the months. So we're trying to obviously tackle that problem, and obviously following the transport bill that was lost around pedicabs, we're hoping that they will listen again. So central government will listen again and actually include that in the transport bill. So we're only trying to do what we can, but in terms of what the council's doing, we are prosecuting a lot of pedicab drivers, and I know that they are a nuisance. It's about the amplified music that they play after 9 p.m. and you know that they're a nuisance to businesses, residents, and visitors passing by. So that's the pedicabs part. The antisocial behaviour, we've recently launched our 5-year strategy. Work is underway to develop a multi-agency strategy group who will lead on developing the annual action plans that will deliver against our strategy objectives. A funding bid has been submitted into public health to fund a pilot project looking into employing a mental health navigator within the ASB team. So it will address some of those issues, some of those ASB perpetrators around the estates that are showing signs of mental health. We will have a professional practitioner that can assess those individuals appropriately. So obviously this is the purpose of this is to provide a mental health support and guidance to victims and perpetrators of ASB, and to support case managers working on cases. So I'm hoping that part of our 5-year strategy, we will be able to address a lot of those issues that we find on our estates, on the streets, and mainly in residential areas. So so obviously we're working
on street properties, not just the estates.
Yeah, it's everybody.
It's not mental health. This is organised because they use the local people that probably might have mental health and vulnerable, or being co-opted on, and the way that it's been left and enabled, it's now brought in a whole lot of vulnerable people that didn't need to be brought in. They may not be mental health, but they are vulnerable.
But they're vulnerable, yeah.
And they are the scapegoats because the big wheels are sitting in their cars dealing, and you need to come to our area because we're the forgotten ward.
Yeah, but thank you very much for your question. It's very important and affects our whole city. Thank you.
Councillor de Mildenberg, did you want to comment on the congestion and pollution issues?
Well, I wanted to address the issue particularly of the e-bikes, the dockless e-bikes, because it's all over Westminster, and you mentioned it in particular. It's a mess, and it's a free-for-all, and it's got to stop, and we're working with the bike companies to get some sense and some organisation into it. So what we've been doing is working with them to identify parking bays where the bikes can be parked and only parked. That's the only way in which we're going to get an answer and a solution to this. And we're hoping that identifying and locating parking bays, together with the use of the technology that controls these bikes, which is called geofencing, will mean that the only places that these e-bikes can be parked are in the designated parking bays. And if people don't park there, then they keep being charged for their ride. And so as the charge mounts up, they will soon realise that if they don't park in the right place, it'll cost them an awful lot of money. The bike companies say they're happy with this, but we also want them to put more of their people on the street, because the bikes that don't get parked in the right place need to be moved, and moved quickly, so that they don't create a hazard for pedestrians, particularly those that are vulnerable, the blind, the disabled, people with prams and so on. So we want to work in partnership with the bike companies because we want to promote more people cycling, but this has got to be done in a way which is fair to everybody and doesn't discriminate against anybody. At the moment, it's particularly pedestrians and the vulnerable.
And just to add to what Paul said on that, I think he and his team have done enormous work building this approach up from scratch, and it hopefully will make a real difference when it comes in a couple of months' time. We know the issue is really tough. The issue would have been a lot easier to solve, if that process had been started by the previous administration here locally, but also particularly if the transport bill that has been long promised by the government actually comes in, which is necessary to help properly regulate both the e-bikes and the pedicabs. That's been promised by the government for a long time, told it was coming in the Queen's speech, this time, no. And there are really worrying signs that it may get dropped from the coming Queen's speech, because that's ultimately, what Paul's doing is by negotiation and trying to get the companies to do things. But we local authorities need actual powers to be able to enforce this to go further, and it requires government legislation. So we are pushing very hard for the government to listen on that, and I'm sure you will need to make sure you're contacting your MPs to try and make sure that happens.
What is the law of riding on ever-widening pavements? Is it legal for these scooters to be on these ever-widening pavements?
It's illegal for anybody to cycle on the pavement, but it's a police matter to enforce it. We don't have the power to enforce cycling on the pavement. The power we do have is under the 1980s Highways Act, which is to remove obstructions to the highway. So that's the power we've been using to impound a number of the badly parked e-bikes that we find on the pavement. That's the only power we have. Yeah.
I'm just going to take one more question from the online audience, which this one is for you, Councillor Noble. Do you have any updates on the Church Street regeneration progress? How do you intend to prevent gentrification and protect stallholders?
Sorry. Going to do our little dance. Yes, I mean, so it depends on how far up to date the question already is. So there was planning permission at the end of March for the first phase of Church Street regeneration. outline planning permission for the 2 other areas, that gives us the ability to undertake the comprehensive resident consultation that we promised before the election that it will be, so that we can undertake a process of co-design with residents in the area about what they want for the other 2 sites B and C. Of course, we had the residents' ballot around Christmas time, which was successful, and that has given us a good chunk of money from the GLA, so that we can have more affordable housing on site A already, which is obviously what we need, especially in an area like Church Street. I'm not blind at all to the concerns that people will have about gentrification in Church Street, nor in any of our other regeneration schemes. But from opposition and now in control, Aisha, as a Church Street Ward Councillor as well, we've consistently said that we didn't want Church Street to become just another street in Westminster with the normal chain shops that we have. We wanted to retain the kind of the number of independent shops that we have, the cafes and especially with the market as well. We didn't want that to become like just another area of London with it being lots of food shops for office workers. We want people to be able to go and have their daily shop in the market. And that, in some ways, is why we're doing the work that we are on the marketplace, so that we can continue to have the same people, but that gives them the electricity and water facilities, so that they can provide a better range of goods and services to their customers, and so the market continues to be a success for many years to come. With respect to the residents and the amount of homes that we're providing, as Adam said at the beginning, we're maximising the amount of truly, genuinely affordable homes that we provide, because we don't want there to be a huge influx of people who are only able to who are the only people who are able to afford very expensive homes. It just doesn't serve the community. We love our community in Church Street, and we want it to continue to thrive. We know that there was serious issues with the quality of the housing that was there before. So obviously we're re-providing all of those homes for people. I think the ballot result, which was overwhelmingly in positive, is a good indication that people are happy with what we're doing in principle. We'll continue to work over the years to come for all 3 sites, and whenever there's an opportunity to provide more genuinely affordable homes on any of those sites, then we'll grasp those opportunities with both hands.
Thank you, Councillor Neville. Gentleman, middle front. There we go.
Yes, Nick Wilson. I've lived in Westminster approximately 40 years. Unfortunately, I had an accident some years ago and was therefore put onto benefits because of a brain injury. As a consequence, I've been living in Westminster, as I said, but the rental situation is such that the last 12, I think 13 years, there was a thing called discretionary housing payments. I believe in about 2010, Westminster got about, I think, 9 or 10 million pounds. It's now down to £1 million. It's had the biggest cut in discretionary housing payment grants from Whitehall. In addition, there's also been the Section 21 notices. I believe, according to the BBC the other day, they said 250,000 of them have been issued in the last 2 years. So there is like a sort of reduction in resources. There's obviously a massive increase in demand. I was actually served with a Section 21 notice after 22 years of paying all my rent completely to vacate on Christmas Day about a year or so ago, which I thought was really kind. It's not my landlord, it's a rogue estate agent who are wanting to do up the place. Anyhow, I can see the situation at the moment with the resources going down, but the demand going up, and I'm just wondering what the council is going to be able to do, given that there's going to be this flood of Section 21 notices, presumably in the next 6 months. Thank you very much.
I think the real challenge we've had in Westminster, as you said, rents have been going up. The government has capped both housing benefit and the overall benefit cap, which has meant that it has been more and more difficult for people who are either fully or partially reliant on benefits to live in the private sector in Westminster. That has obviously massively increased the amount of temporary accommodation that we have to support people in. That is not the best route for looking after those people, and obviously it costs the council a lot of money that previously would have been paid for by the DWP, essentially. The DHP was set up to try and manage that transition when they put in those, those restrictions on housing benefit, and we've had to, as a council, have had to top it up in recent years from our own funds to try and make ends meet. And it's a sticking plaster, not a solution. We need, there are things that are outside of our control that the government needs to get a grip on, and they should have got a grip on Section 21 notices a very long time ago. But we've now got the Renters Reform Bill going through, which needs to pass. In terms of, obviously, we are buying more temporary accommodation ourselves to help people who fall through that and can't be still supporting their homes with DHP, so that they can continue to live in or near Westminster. In terms of DHP, David, is there anything else in particular that?
Yeah, you're quite right to note that the DHP allowance is given by central government, and it's inadequate, so that we have to go into Westminster's own resources to put it to pay the whole amount of discretionary housing payments that are being awarded. They are not there to solve the problem of higher rents. They are there for to help people who are in imminent threat of being made homeless. There can't be a long-term solution.
Matt, do you want to talk about wider issues in the PRS?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, the rents are going out of control. I think the median rent for a two-bedroom flat in Westminster is now north of £700 a week. So we have to take, and we are limited as to what we can do as a local authority here. We are reliant on the government to pass legislation to make these changes, and they've been, we were promised rent reform years ago. It's taken them a long time and they still haven't given us an actual date when they will be pushing through the legislation which will ban Section 21 evictions. So we're still waiting. We think that the best thing that we can do at the moment, or at least one of the things we can do at the moment, is inform people of their rights. So make sure that tenants are aware. Person said earlier on about going to rent tribunals. It's not an ideal situation, but it is something which is available to people. A lot of people don't realise that it's possible to use them. Otherwise, so we are in the process, and we have a private rented sector strategy group. We are in the process of coming up with a renters charter for the PRS, which will be there hopefully to both serve to make tenants aware of their rights, but also to make landlords aware of their responsibilities also. We are in a cost of living crisis. We'll try and get people to sign up to a charter which will effectively mean that landlords and letting agents who do sign up will commit themselves to a basic set of standards of behaviour, which we'll try to make that go beyond just the bare legal minimum. But yeah, we are hopeful of. I think that the legislation, when it goes through, is a first step. It is in no way going to solve the issues that we're facing at the moment. The demand for private rented sector accommodation in Westminster is still huge, and that's what's driving the price up. And it's not sustainable. And more broadly, it requires action from central government across the country, not just in London. People are moving here because they see London as where opportunities are. It will be better if people saw opportunities in where they lived in their towns and cities across the country. Of course, we welcome our visitors, but it is causing an increase in rents for everybody.
Yep.
Thank you very much, Councillor Noble. Apologies, I'm going to shout, but otherwise we're going to get a microphone down. If we can go to the gentleman with
Can't hear him.
I can't hear. I can't
Got
hear.
earphones, not on.
No.
No.
There's another one coming. No.
I think have they all stopped working?
Want to give it another go?
Yeah.
Now we will.
Okay, one more time. So time and time again this evening we're just hearing about residents complaining but being essentially ignored, and the complaints process doesn't seem to be working. And then we've just had on our estate, the whole estate's been leafleted with, is your landlord ignoring you? Why is the council not taking gaslighting more seriously? And why is it not implementing a policy to prevent it? We know that Stuart and Debbie have come back to us and said there's issues they're going to look into, but there needs to be a policy directly to address gaslighting, especially in the light of when you look at the Met and Grenfell, all the residents, all the people who are the victims talk about continually being gaslit. Why is this council not taking this issue more seriously?
Councillor, well, it's Councillor Begum. Do you want me to have a first go at responding to that? I think. Well, I mean, what you're talking about initially is a housing question, but I will start because you're talking about council. You're talking about council officers, so I will start with the response, and then if Councillor Hagg or Councillor Begum or anybody else wants to add to that, they can. As per the response that we've given you, there are a number of policies in place. There's an officer code of conduct. We believe we have everything in place that addresses the issues that would be raised through gaslighting. So we don't believe we need a separate standalone policy to deal with that.
It's not good enough.
So an example was sent through to me today. I've had an initial look at it. We will look at that in more detail. But on the face of it, that it does not meet the definition of gaslighting. What I am saying to you is we do have things in place within the organisation in terms of how officers are expected to behave that address the issues that would be raised through gaslighting. I also should say that we're not perfect. We know we're not getting it right a lot of the time, and that is something else that we're working on at the moment to try and address, to improve the level of service and to ensure that we start getting things right where we're not at the moment. So I'm not standing here saying we're getting it right all the time, but what I am saying is we believe we have the right things, right mechanisms in place in the council to deal with the kinds of issues that would be caught up through gaslighting. Would any member like to add to that?
So I think the point is we need to look at how we can strengthen those mechanisms. I think the challenge there are so many cases on, we know historically from housing, and still it's happening too often, where people are tearing their hair out about the problems that they've been facing. Many of them are really complex cases that even with a fair wind are challenging to tackle because they quite often involve lots of different moving parts, different people, systems, but there's a whole piece of work that needs to happen to improve those systems and processes and how the council operates. The issue, obviously, with gaslighting is that it is making an assumption of bad faith rather than all the many other reasons why situations fail. And obviously, you've talked about other organisations that are struggling with credibility, and I think obviously they're not creating specific gaslighting policy, but they are, all of those turnaround things are looking at how to strengthen accountability and transparency. So I totally get where you're coming from. I think the issue is that we can just automatically jump to an assumption, a claim of bad faith when something's just not working properly, and that may be that there could be issues around systems, could be issues around people, could be issues around individual cases.
You need to find examples of bad faith then, is that what you're saying?
Sorry, I mean, the assumption of gaslighting generally implies that something is being done in bad.
Okay, so we'll find examples for bad faith for you.
Well, and the question is, I think the question about those is those can be addressed. So the question is, can those be addressed with existing mechanisms? And I think that's what Stuart has outlined. Clearly, there is an awful lot that still needs to be done in terms of improving housing in Westminster and other services as well. We know that.
Until the complaints process and the people who are investigating the complaint isn't the team who you're complaining about, it's never going to be independent enough for residents.
So, I mean, obviously, in terms of the sort of systems within that do separate, obviously the complaints team is separate from the individual housing units. But obviously, I appreciate it's when it goes to the top level for Stage 2. I mean, is there anything?
John Brett from Wessex Gardens. This is a question for Adam. Adam, will Westminster residents ever have their own platform where they can meet with management and cabinet members to discuss their problems face to face?
I believe the answer to that is yes. I think there are so obviously we'll come back to picking up those other things second. But in relation to that, obviously there is I can hand to Lisa in terms of where we're going in terms of the residents panel that's being developed and evolving, and then I can come back.
So we do have a resident tenant panel, and they have supported us in our housing commission. We've now extended the invitation to all our residents associations across the borough. Just quickly speaking on housing, you know, I've spoken to a lot of people who are really upset about the service or the experience they've had through housing services. So we've just had our housing commission, which have reported their findings. And as a next step, we have established the corporate housing management program, where we'll be looking at all our services, where we'll be looking at our procedures and our systems in housing. And we're going to do a deep dive into it. And we're at the early stages of it. So we're prioritizing our housing improvement plan. But we're definitely going to be looking at how we can get resident feedback into that housing improvement plan.
But obviously that will need to, obviously that is evolving and growing. And John, we know that the loss of the housing panel over about 11 years ago was a real problem. So John, and in relation to those other issues, look, we totally understand there are real issues of trust out there in the housing department. We understand that, and I think it's trying to work out what the best way forward is. So I totally get where you're coming from, and I think what we've got to try and do is work out if there are clear issues around staff conduct and those sort of things that those need to be addressed. There should be mechanisms for doing that, but also sometimes there will be genuine good disagreements about what's going on, and people may not have full information, all those sort of things. And it's a question, we need to be a little bit careful to automatically assuming that some people are gaslit when stuff's going wrong. But I totally get that there may well be cases, you know, I'm not saying that there aren't, but the point is there are those processes within the code of conduct and everything else that are designed to address it. We're always happy to look at how we strengthen them, but the issue, if you just say, gaslighting, it could just be applied to anything where someone doesn't agree with what they're being told by a housing officer. So you've got to try and find the right balance. I understand that. Is there anything else you want to say, Lisa? Yeah, so I totally hear you, and ultimately we have to re-establish trust of our tenants. And the stuff's underway, but it's going to take time. It's not going to happen overnight. Yeah, so tenants and leasehold, sorry.
Okay, thank you. I know you've been waiting a long time for your question.
Yes, I have waited a long time. I hope you can hear me. I have heard you do something for people who are threatened with homelessness. Well, I have lived in North Westminster for 7 years in a housing estate, and my private landlord tried several times to make me homeless. Now, finally, I was evicted. So in April, I got an eviction. I went to the council, and the council accepted the duty to help me, but nothing has happened yet. I mean, I'm homeless and have lived here. I really don't know what I can do. I mean, I email the council again and again. I'm homeless. Please help me. You have given the promise to help me.
Sorry, just for clarity, are you currently in temporary accommodation, or you contacted them in April, and you didn't get a response?
Well, I was evicted in April, mid of April. Some people came around, they changed the locks, and I can't access my place anymore. Okay. I'm homeless.
So, and you contacted, if you're either Bruckner Street or the Passage, you contacted them.
I haven't contacted the Passage because I try to live not with the with the passage. But I am homeless, and the council has recognized I am homeless,
Yeah.
and they had the duty to help me.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So you've had contact with the individual officer that confirmed you have the duty. All I'm saying is the single person's pathway is based out of the passage here, and the family one is at Bruckner Street. So that's what I'm saying. There are the two pathways. So, but you have the council have contacted you, but you've not had enough support. I think we need to take that away afterwards and clarify what has been provided and what hasn't. But very clearly, we can pick that up. So Nick, who sat next to you, will pick that up and do that. Because the council is dealing with ever-growing numbers of people who are facing homelessness, which is putting pressure on our systems. We're doing what we can to help with the processing of those things, which is a real challenge. We're also doing, as I said at the top, investing in new temporary accommodation to try and build capacity. But the scale of the problem of people being pushed out of the private rented sector is enormous, and I can't pretend we have a magic wand in our toolkit. But we can answer your emails and get that sorted.
I'm just going to go to a question online, which is important and very topical. I'll probably, Councillor Butler-Thalassa, start with you, and then I'm sure the leader will want to say something as well. What can the City Council do to support St Mary's Hospital, given today's announcement?
I suppose just to say that today's announcement was absolutely shocking. So you might know that St Mary's Hospital was on the list, the government list for the 40 new hospitals to be built. And today the government announced which hospitals would be built, and St Mary's has been found to be on a list to be built after 2030. And there's real concern that by 2030 St Mary's will have collapsed. So it's a really, really pressing problem. And I've been speaking to the chief exec of Imperial Hospitals today about it, and they've issued a statement saying how disappointed they are with the government's decision. And I think we're issuing a statement about it as soon as possible, and we're going to write to the Health Secretary and say how unacceptable this is. And I have to say that Westminster has been dealt a particularly bad blow in terms of NHS services. So not only has we've had this bad news about St Mary's, as you may know locally, the Gordon Hospital, our mental health hospital, has been closed since the beginning of the pandemic. It was initially shut temporarily because of the difficulties with social distancing, but it still hasn't reopened. So we currently have no acute mental health beds in Westminster, and that's creating massive problems. And a lot of my time is currently being spent negotiating with the NHS about what can be done about that and how can we reopen some acute beds. We've also had a facility in North Westminster in St John's Wood closed that had continuing healthcare patients. It was called Butterworth. So at the moment, there is a huge pressure in Westminster with NHS facilities either closing, not being repaired, and it's a massive problem. And I think that, we have to very strongly campaign about this and lobby the government and do our best to change things.
I was going to say, I think Nafska's covered it all. Ultimately, the government has to change their position on this because they've been promising this for so long. I've been on the council longer than Nafska, and it wasn't just in the 40 hospitals programmes. There have been many, many times before when the government has promised that they were going to invest in St Mary's and failed to do so. And we all know that it's on some of the buildings there are on its last legs, and it's a major trauma centre that's providing not just for Westminster but for all across London. So it's absolutely vital, and we will put all the pressure we can on this government and obviously outside of this meeting try and get a different, better government. But that's not for this meeting.
Thank you. Question from... Yeah, thank you. The microphone's on its way to you.
How can the council justify the PDHU, Pimlico District Heating Undertaking, which on Lillington Gardens is at least 2 to 3 times as expensive as running a gas combi boiler, and with no end-user metering? And the Phase 1 buildings have been told that they're not eligible for metering. Also, there's been no planned preventative maintenance on the PDHU, which has led to a crisis where the risers are going to have to be replaced, all internal heating and hot water pipes have to be replaced, and they're about to install a heat exchanger pump. Why are the current occupiers and owners expected to cover the cost of one-off expenses to replace a system that is the responsibility of the council? Private landlords would not be expected to charge a tenant for the replacement of a boiler.
Thank you. Councillor Noble.
Well, I can talk to the issues to do with broadly to do with the council's plans for the renewal of the network. So, as you might be aware, we're looking at the moment at the different options in the form of an outline business case for the future of PDHU. Because we know, and I'll let Lisa talk to some of the issues to do with the current situation with the management and maintenance of PDHU, which doesn't fall under my brief. But we're looking at the options to renew the networking and possibly also the heating source of PDHU to decarbonise it. It's important to recognise that, unfortunately, this situation has been somewhat inherited too, is because the previous administration are the ones ultimately who let the PDHU decline and to get into this state. And I know that it's kind of the system has become more known for leaks than actual heating at the moment. Now, again, ultimately, people who live in the homes that are served by PDHU need to have heating one way or the other. And so what we're doing is looking at those different options. There is no cheap way of replacing the network. We will, as part of the process, look to, perhaps an apt term or not apt, but insulate leaseholders from as much of the cost as we can. But ultimately, we may not be able to, we can't promise that leaseholders won't have to pay anything at all. But we're looking at the various options, as I said. Particularly for the heating source, we will look to obtain as much grant funding as possible from outside of the council to therefore to keep the council's costs as low as possible. And otherwise, we know that there are views within the community about possible alternatives such as installing electric boilers. The issue with that is that in terms of the actual running cost, the cost of heating, that will be higher for residents than it is at the moment, and the actual cost of replacing that system will be more expensive than upgrading the network. So it is a long program. It is a piece of work which is huge in its scope. We will be doing. We will be also, of course, having quite a lot of resident consultation sessions on the future of PDHU when we get to the stage of having done a good assessment of the different options that we have. But as I said, I'll let Lisa talk about the other aspects and billing and what have you. Yes, I agree.
I think Matt's covered most of it, but I think we're at the stage where there isn't an option not to do anything, because the majority of the issues in Lillington, Longmoor, Churchill Gardens are to do with the PDHU. Because we are in the early stages, I cannot speak much about the billing or what the implications would be to leaseholders. But we are looking at getting funding, getting as much funding as possible. And we will be starting a resident group to begin the consultation.
Sorry, I just will add one more thing. On the metering, there's no reason why when the system is upgraded, whatever the heating source is, that we won't be able to have meters for individual flats. It will be possible, we think at the moment, to have individual meter usage so that there won't be any issues of whether perception or real, that people are subsidising other people's use. We should be able to get meters in there for individual residents.
At the moment, we don't.
At the moment, we don't have we can't say exactly when that's going to be. At the moment, it's, as I say, this process could have started years ago, but it didn't. It's kind of like the old Chinese proverb: the best time to plant the tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. We're doing what we can now.
Thank you. Yeah.
My question really was about the e-scooters and bikes that are being left on the pavement. I know you talked about it earlier, but like today, I sent a complaint to the Westminster Reported and got a notification back with the email of the company just to get in touch with them. I mean, it's really just not good enough because they're just being left. I mean, when you go into Oxford Street and Charing Cross Road, the bike's there. But in our area in Westbourne, I was reporting 6 bikes left on the pavement outside our block. And as I say, getting in touch with the company, it's just no good.
Well, we're doing all we can to get the companies to act as quickly as possible. Your experience is the same as mine. I write to the companies every day about bikes being dumped on the pavement. I write to them all and to ensure that they take the action. They're their bikes. They're making money out of these bikes. It's their responsibility to move those bikes. That's been my position all the way along. Now, on occasions, we do move and we do impound their bikes, but if we just simply don't have the people or the ability to go round Westminster clearing up the bike company's mess. It's their responsibility. I'm going to hold them to that responsibility as part of any agreement that we come to them about providing bays for their bikes to park. I'm very, very keen that they take their responsibilities as commercial companies seriously, not expect the public sector to pick up their mess every day. So I'm going to continue to make sure these bike companies do the job that they should be doing themselves.
Thank you, Councillor Moldenberg. At the back in the yellow shirt, please.
Can you hear me okay? Yeah.
Yes, we can hear.
I've come with 3 questions. I had about 10 questions, and they've all been adequately answered for me tonight in the earlier session. So thanks. It's really refreshing to be able to talk to people like this who are on our side, I feel. And it's, for the first time, I really feel like we're getting real answers, and it is very refreshing for all of us. So even though it's late, I just want to still ask 3 questions. But I'm really, really pleased to hear about the swimming pool, our local Queen Mother pool. That's not going to be rebuilt because we all thought we were going to lose that. And I think that needs to get out to the residents living here because we all thought it was going to go. So my first question is, I'm also in intermediate housing like this lady here. And we've also had our rents jacked up by Peabody. We've got a huge churn. We used to be Crown, and now we're Peabody since 2011 when they bought us. And every year they've been raising the rent. So we've got a huge churn of tenants, families having to move out because they cannot afford the rents anymore. The only power that I feel that the council has over housing associations is planning. And I wondered if that could be used against these housing associations such as Dolphin Living and Peabody, who are really ripping us off and destroying our communities. So that's my first question. And that's coming from fellow residents because I emailed everybody and told them I was coming tonight, and they asked me to ask that specific question. Is there anything you can do to stop our rents going up? The second question is another one for the pavements cabinet minister, I'm afraid. Boris Johnson created a cycle superhighway or something that has made it extremely dangerous outside the White Swan. So we have bicycles, scooters, and now we have electric bicycles and scooters coming at us, and we are trying to cross the road to Pimlico Station. It's extremely dangerous. Our local band that plays live in all the pubs around there has written a song about it. And that song was written about 10 years ago, and yet nothing's been done about it. It's absolutely terrifying, and I wondered if you could do anything with the mayor to change that for us. And then my third question is really just to mention the fantastic work that I feel Councillor Nafsika is doing with the Gordon, with trying to keep the Gordon open. And this is a hospital with 51 beds in it, and it would affect all the most vulnerable people that we are living amongst. It is affecting them. There's, these people, we have the most hostels in this square mile around here, anywhere else in the whole of England and Wales. We have very many people who are homeless in this area, and it's only getting worse if they haven't got 51 beds to go to when they're really ill. It's not just people who are homeless, it can happen to anyone. We've had lords and ladies who have had to be put in hospital at times. Mental health can affect anyone, and it's the only hospital that we have in Westminster. It hasn't been closed. It's actually, the wards are all still there, the bathrooms are all still there, the roof garden's still there, but the patients are not there. And the staff were actually given notice, and some of them chose to work in other hospitals. But really, it's still there, and it can be reopened if there was the political will. So I just want to ask if anybody is actually prepared to campaign on that, whether we can send you our email addresses and get on board with some kind of, when there's a consultation in the next few months, whether we can actually form a little group and campaign on that. So that's my third question. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I will, if it's okay, do those in reverse order, because I know the strength of feeling around the Gordon. So, Councillor Butler-Thalessis, if you want to.
Thanks, Terry. I have to say, in my work with the NHS, we've very much highlighted how important the Gordon is for the local community, especially in South Westminster, and how much it is necessary to have a place that we know that when people feel acutely unwell, they have a place that they can go and ask for help, and how important that is to support the homeless community. And I agree that we need to campaign on this, because it's an issue. We can put pressure on the NHS, but it's also a wider issue. It's, to some extent, it's about the government's decisions and how they fund mental health services. And I think that we all have experience of NHS services that are temporarily closed. And this is, things are initially closed temporarily, and then they are closed permanently. And we need to do everything we can to fight this. And I'd be very happy if people who want to form a group and campaign on this. If you want to email me, give me your contact details. I'd be very happy to support that.
Thank you. Councillor Moldenberg, Cycle Superhighway.
The cycle lane on Vauxhall Bridge Road outside the White Swan. I've share your views. I've done for the past 10 years, and I will write again to Transport for London to see if we can get any change in that. I'm surprised there hasn't been more accidents, because it is. I've stood there too, and been quite terrified at the speeds that some cyclists go down there when people are trying to cross the road. So it does need looking at again, and I will write to them again.
Thank you. And intermediate rents.
Yeah, I just had a little chat with my doppelganger, and we don't think that there's anything that we can do in the planning regime to control rent. However, if you do, if we could have a chat later on, in the same way that we'll discuss the Dolphin Living issue with Dolphin, if you could pass on the information so that I'll see if we can talk to Peabody as well.
obviously environmental health, where conditions are poor in intermediate housing. Obviously our environmental health teams have obviously helped over the years in trying tackling some of those issues. I think in certain cases where certain RSLs will want, housing associations were wanting to build new properties in Westminster, then you have some leverage. We know that, and there are ways that we can look at. We are looking at how we can exercise that. But the reality is, then they're not at the moment looking to build here, so we don't have that tool in our box. But yeah, we will make the case to the RSLs about the way in which they're housing associations. I'll stop using jargon. But so housing associations, how they treat their residents. Happy to write them. I mean, obviously we know we've got to improve our own housing, but there are some particularly egregious issues across the city, including in my ward, where housing associations aren't doing right by their residents. And happy to put whatever pressure we can, but there needs to be national level reform on the whole sector to make sure that it delivers a better quality of service to its residents and is more accountable to its residents. Because ultimately, if we don't get a grip on our own improving our own housing services, then there is an election in a couple of years' time, and I know that will be beyond the ballot. The housing associations don't have that accountability, and that needs national level reform.
Thank you. I should say, I think the advertised end time for tonight was 8 o'clock, but the Cabinet has agreed to stay here until 8:30. So I'm just going to take the last question online, which, Councillor Barraclough, is for you. To have warmer, more energy-efficient homes that produce fewer carbon emissions, would Westminster City Council support double glazing in listed buildings like RBKC has done?
Yes. So RBKC hasn't actually done that. What they've said is you can have secondary glazing in listed buildings if it's attached to another listed building. So, and as far as we know, no one's actually taken advantage of that freedom. So, just need to be careful with making comparisons. So, yeah, the answer is, of course, we need to insulate all our buildings, but particularly in Westminster, we've got a lot of historic buildings. We've got 11,000 listed buildings, and 2/3 of the city is a conservation area. And we're very keen to encourage people who own buildings to insulate them, and that includes double glazing, but also a range of other measures, taking a whole house approach to it. So we've set up a retrofit task force, bringing together representatives from landowners, but also building experts, so the housing associations and so on, because we've got a lot of housing associations who have listed buildings. There's one in my ward in Maida Vale. It's a huge terrace of Victorian houses that's now chopped up into bedsits for the housing association with terrible insulation and gas fires. It's a really awful place for people to live, and it needs urgent work. So bring everyone together to find an agreed way forward that can respect heritage, but also can encourage people to bring forward plans to retrofit and to insulate. The first thing they've done is, if you Google City of Westminster windows, I think you'll find it. There's a guide to how to go about installing double glazing in conservation areas and listed buildings, and it takes you a flow chart, takes you what you need to do, and if you follow that flow chart, and at the end, if it is a listed building, you will need planning permission and listed building consent, because that's the law. It will allow you to get that permission relatively straightforwardly. So the answer is, it's a very long way of saying, yes, we'd like to encourage double glazing listed buildings. Obviously, it has to be done respecting the heritage of the building, and we're going to try and make it easier for people.
Thank you. Any more questions in the room? Yes, if we can go there, and then, sorry, we'll come to you afterwards. Thank you.
Hi. I think this has sort of been touched on, with a few people over the guests, and obviously my neighbour has as well. Our building, as I say, for Dolphin Living, council give planning permission for it to be an affordable housing building. And that is what they are supposed to stick with, because that's how they got the planning permission. But they don't, as was touched before. It's intermediate rent. They constantly put it up. They list themselves as a charity, but they work as a profitable business. There's no regulations to oversee this. And you mentioned about the tribunal, taking rent tribunal. That is only available for market rent. There is nothing for anyone on intermediary rent to go to. It's a big gaping hole. So there is nothing to help us on that front. So affordable housing, hasn't been for many, many years. They can't be, brought up about this. Then they also then give you Section 21 and get you out if you actually are a troublemaker that they don't like because they're basically a thorn in their side, who get them to do things that they're supposed to be doing, but they don't. It's what can be done really to oversee these people, and make them do what they're supposed to do and not evict people who are basically not done anything wrong.
Yeah, I mean, can I just say that I think everyone on the panel would share my opinion that retaliatory or punitive Section 21s is the worst example of landlords. We wouldn't expect it of anybody who's a landlord in Westminster. It's horrible if it's a dodgy, letting agent or huge landowner or anybody else. So as I said before, if we could have a conversation about that separately, and then we'll do what we can to put some pressure on them to behave better.
And just to say in broader policy terms, I mean, there are real issues about certain types of intermediate rent not being affordable being notionally affordable but not affordable. So obviously there's work that we're doing on our own housing stock where we're building intermediate rent to make those rents more affordable. And there is some policies that Jeff is coming out with in the summer, which will be using in both our affordable housing strategy, SPD, and the work we're doing on the city plan. Between them, there are intentions there to try and make the types of the rent levels in intermediate housing more affordable and more in line with the London living rent being the sort of cap rather than wherever possible. I mean, there's.
I'm very conscious of time, and we've got 2 more questions that we need to.
So I just want to clarify what the leader said. Policy changes will apply to new.
Yeah, for new build. Yeah,
not to existing buildings. So it won't help the lady in the audience.
But we recognise the problem, which is why we're trying to fix it in the future.
Right, thank you. So question over there, and then the last question of the evening will be from the gentleman at the back. Thank you.
Does the council know how many empty properties there are in the borough, yes, north and south? Is there a figure? But also, in terms of subletting in properties with the Airbnb, does the council have any plans to reduce the number? And also, do you have a fraud hotline that residents can ring up to tell officers where the properties are being subletted? So
I think, Adam, did you want to start?
I'll start. So there are 3 different things there. I mean, in terms of empty homes, there are at the moment, I think, 1,100 homes that are declared empty, which is where you have to self-report to that you have an empty property for council tax, and you register that with council tax. That's gone up by a third over the last year or so, but we know that's just the tip of the iceberg. Obviously, some of the, as we've said earlier today, the census showed a lot of people not here in Westminster during the height of the pandemic. Obviously, a lot of that is people with second homes and stuff like that, but it's also drawn attention to homes that are in Westminster that are just used as assets and aren't actually being lived in, and that is a real problem. So we've got an empty homes officer, we've got an empty homes reporting mechanism where people can report in homes that are empty. So because we're trying to get a sense of the scale of the problem, and there are lots of in different parts of the city, there are different challenges that relate to empty homes. So obviously in Knightsbridge and in Belgravia and Mayfair and that stuff, that's quite often some unidentifiable trust through the Virgin Islands or Cayman Islands having a property there left empty is a very different thing, which is problematic for that community, but it's a very different thing to on our estates where there are properties that are being left empty for voids, which obviously we're trying to get on top of where there are ours. But in terms of subletting, there is a way of reporting that, and we can make sure you have access to that afterwards. And you mentioned one other thing, sorry.
It was a hotline for reporting
fraud for fraud for illegal subletting tenancies, and the answer is we've got that somewhere.
Which should be available on our website, but there are officers who can help you with that afterwards. If that's, I can see Chris has got his hand up. Okay, last question of the evening then, please.
Okay, I'll try and make it quick. It's not possible. Gary Hayes, Soho Housing Association. So the Housing Association is about to rip out all its windows and replace them, though they were put in 96. Their softwood were well treated, but they were painted black. Now, anybody who knows black clothes, you should understand that they'll absorb all the heat. That cracks the wood. However, we've still got 90% of the windows where they're very usable, but still they've gone for 100% solution of rip it out and replace it with double glazing, because you'll get some improvements maybe on the glass or the distance between the double glazing or whatever else. That doesn't seem to be feeding back to the council, and the council's not really proactive on this. That housing associations shouldn't do things on a convenience basis, but do things on a retrofit basis, which is to the best standard without losing good quality. We've got another 40 years in most of those windows, at least 70% of them. Secondly, on air quality, if you know about air quality, you'll know that there are 2 periods in the day when you're way over the limits, and I've measured it up to 4,000 times what is legal. Why? Because you've got congestion and you've got so many cars all pumping out at the same time. But averaging that over the year is not feasible, because as you know, when the kids are walking home or people are walking along, that's the time they're there, when it's congestion. So that's when you're getting poisoned. That isn't addressed in the legislation and needs to be looked at properly. And thirdly, there's no education coming from the council. You really don't give education. So when somebody's riding a bike on a pavement, then you should take a photograph of them, have a sensor saying, yes, you're doing more than 7 kilometers an hour, so you should stop. Take that photograph of that person, educate them. Give them a carrot. Well, don't give them anything apart from a warning. And then on the 3rd time, give them a fine. You can put those in whenever a resident complains about this happening. It doesn't have to be everywhere. It doesn't have to be invasive, and it doesn't have to be a CCTV. It's simply a sensor which I could put in for you for about £5. Get it and put it in. So these kinds of things, you're not educating people about waste, throwing away litter. None of these things are around anymore. We're living in the 21st century where we've got technology that can do all of this for us, and very, very affordably.
Thank you. I think probably the first 2 questions might be Councillor Noble. So housing associations, I think it was Soho Housing question. And then air quality?
Well, I think it was, just to clarify, on the windows, was it stuff that you think was being done in breach of planning policy, or was it just they were doing a bad job?
So we live in a conservation area, and the board raised the money to get all the windows renewed on the basis that there would be an improvement, for example, in lowering the decibels. But if you everybody here put a mobile app on their phones, those that use them, which can measure, it's called Noise DB, it's a free app. You can measure how much noise there is yourself, and people could report that and report it to each other and compare it with each other and get the noise down. What I'm saying is we need to make the noise less, not just look at improving the noise reduction from better technology like better windows. But those windows can be repainted, the gas can be improved inside. I could put better gas inside them, use a better organ mix, and that's really easy to do. And over a period of time, so there's not too much disruption. What I'm saying is we're using archaic methods. We're not in the 21st century yet. We're not using technology properly.
mean, I think, I suppose in relation to the specific things that your housing association is doing, I think there are obviously things where we can share best practice about things that have been done. I mean, as I said, Jeff's talked about various things that we can help make retrofitting easier, retrofitting homes easier, and I know that obviously Matt's looking at with some of the work that we're doing with the retrofit task force. On the other sort of more congestion things, Paul, do you want to?
Yeah, one of the interesting things about air quality in Westminster over recent years is that it's actually improved, primarily because of the introduction by the Mayor of the ultra-low emission zone, which has reduced the amount of emissions in London to a really marked extent. One of the ways in which we're helping as well is by encouraging the use of more electric vehicles. We installed around 1,000 new electric vehicle charging points in Westminster in the past 12 months, which is a record for us. We've now got the most electric vehicle charging points in the whole of London. So the reduction in emissions has really improved the quality of the air that we breathe. The problem that we have is there's still a big job to do because it's still too high. And one of the things in which where we want to take action in the future is emissions from buildings. Emissions from buildings is one of the biggest single reason for poor air quality. And one of the things that we are doing is working with the hospitality industry, because believe it or not, the biggest cause of emissions from buildings in terms of particles is from the huge number of restaurants, cafes, bars and hotels who have the gas cookers on for something like 16, 18 hours a day. And that's causing huge emissions from buildings, as well as damaging the health of the people who are working in these establishments. So we want to try and get more of these establishments cooking with induction hobs, which is electric stoves, because that reduces the emissions. It keeps the quality of the cooking just as well. And many of the hospitality industry people are keen to do this. So we're working on a wide range of fronts to improve air quality, both outside on the street, but also in buildings as well. Yes. Yeah. We agree with that, and that's what indeed we're going to do. We're going to install many hundreds of bays for the electric bikes. That's certainly on our agenda over the next few months. And we'd also, if you've walked around Westminster over the past month, you'll have noticed No Mow May, which has seen so many of our green spaces just flowering with dandelions and daisies and all sorts of things that you see. It's been a huge success. We want to do more of this. It'll increase biodiversity, it'll make life a lot more pleasant, and the city will look a lot more beautiful. I agree, we need action on a whole range of fronts, all working together so that we can make the environment a much more attractive place. We can breathe cleaner air, and we can encourage plant life and biodiversity. That benefits us all.
Thank you. I'm really sorry. We're significantly over time.
perfectly happy to have a comments. We've lost a lot of people, but also a huge thank you to those of you who've stuck with us. I just wondered if the leader wanted to say anything in closing tonight.
Thank you very, very much. Obviously, we're going to be having these events throughout the year across the city. We're doing things to make it easier for you to contact the council. If you haven't already done so, do check out the new consultation hub, which is designed to help make it easier for you to see what we want, what's going on in the city, and where we'd really value your input. And yeah, look forward to keeping on the conversations. And totally understand, there's a lot of things we still need to do in the city, and we'll do our best to do them. Thanks very much, everyone.